All right, all right. Hello, hello. Welcome to our Scalable Microfrontends. Very excited to have you guys here today. And I want to introduce my friend. I met Minko at my very first Angular conference. He's always been really one of my favorite people, so I've been super happy to see him more and more involved in leading the Angular team. So basically, if there's anything you want to know about Angular or the future of Angular, this is your guy. And Minko's not here today to talk to you. He's here to talk with you, right? So I really want to remind everybody that you're all encouraged to raise your hands, participate in this discussion. So Minko, welcome. Good morning. Thank you for coming. How are you doing this morning?
Hello, thank you for having me. Is that the time when I should have my pose, or did I miss
Yeah,
the moment?
I'm supposed to say hi. I'm Bonnie.
Yes, I was just. Okay,
Yeah,
my thinking
thank you.
pose.
That was perfect. Samantha will love it. That's perfect.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name
Yeah.
is Minko, as Bonnie mentioned. I think that was my very first NG-Conf as well. That was probably 2015 or so, right?
Yeah, I think so. I was just asking you random questions about WebRTC. You were I was very impressed with you.
I was
And
also
I'm
doing
still
a
impressed
project
with
with
you.
WebRTC back then. That was my startup.
Yes. Yes. And you knew the answers to my questions and it was just great. And you were very patient with me. Okay, so you're here today because we've all seen a need in the community for scalable micro front ends, right? And you've been talking to large companies and gathering requirements. So can you kind of start us off there and maybe kind of explain like the problem that we're trying to solve?
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the excellent introduction. Yes, we have been noticing how people sometimes struggle building really big Angular applications. And by really big, I mean, for sure, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, but sometimes more like millions of lines of code. And there are a couple of different challenges that people are facing. For example, how they can take these projects and start building them in multiple teams without necessarily having much overlapping functionality, or how they can deploy only separate parts of the application completely independently without necessarily having to deploy the whole thing and synchronize across the entire organization. Some other challenges that people are hitting are around build speed, specifically their CI struggling with their deployments. When the code base grows and they don't have any caching, any disk caching of their build, or like any remote caching, this often causes some challenges. So over the past couple of months, for about 2 months, I had multiple chats with different companies and different teams within Google, just to see what approaches for solving these challenges that they have been using. And we have about 5 or 6 distinct patterns right now. With their trade-offs, there is no ideal solution at all. I know that many people are just hoping that Mojo Federation is going to come here and like save us all from building applications at scale. And it's actually one of the most challenging ones, especially when it comes down to managing different versions of the micro frontends running on the page. So yeah, I would love to chat with you to see what challenges you're facing, why are you trying to use micro frontends, and why a more monolithic approach is not going to work for your use case.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any comments, just feel free to raise your hands and we can start a discussion.
And I do want to mention also, because I saw a lot has a great question in the comment, but the thing is, we have, because these calls are growing bigger and bigger, that we're not going to be able to answer all questions. So I really want to keep the questions relevant to the conversation, which is the scalable micro front ends. I think it's very interesting. Do you guys have questions about this? I have questions. So if you guys don't have questions, I will ask it. Go ahead, Han. Han always has great questions.
Just like I mean, great to meet you. Just a basic question: can you quickly define what micro front end means to you, like to catch everybody up? Because I think everybody has a little bit different understanding of what it means. So I think that's a much better way to start this conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Micro front-end is often an overloaded concept. And for the remaining questions, so we can continue the discussion in the next like 40 minutes. If at a certain point we feel that we have exhausted the conversation, we can answer some of the questions that you have in the chat, right, Bonnie? Cool. So with Microfrontends, yeah, it's usually running a couple of different applications on the page that are developed in and deployed in isolation, and there is some runtime linking. Let's say you can deploy them. There is a shared shell, which is something like a canvas where you're rendering the individual apps, and you can develop the applications in parallel. They're not necessarily very coupled with each other. They're mostly decoupled. There still might be some communication between them through message passing, let's say, or some shared memory, but that's not a requirement. So pretty much building multiple smaller front ends, smaller applications independently and deploying them in a similar way. And these technologies, they could be using these applications, they could be using different technologies. We have been exploring the Angular use case, but ideally, you might want to be developing them in like Vue or React or Svelte. I don't think this is necessarily a good idea to have a couple of different frameworks running on the page with their competing life cycles and adding to the bundle, but for some people, this is a good intermediate solution. Yeah, that was a very long answer of what I think that microfrontends are. Still a very vague one, though, but it's kind of a vague concept.
Yeah, because this is the thing with, micro and macro and mono and like all these different buzzwords that come up. But if we look at them, if we just look at them, like micro just means small. So we're just talking about very small front ends.
Yeah,
I was getting really intimidated by all these words, and then I just look at it and I'm like, but it's really not new words,
Yeah, there is a large application that is decomposed into smaller modules, and each module can live as an independent application in most cases. And we're combining them together to provide a rich, coherent user experience.
Yeah.
I think the next one on the, I think, Sonny, you raise your hand.
Hey, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by the subject of this talk, because this was more like something I was experiencing myself without naming it, being able to name it, because we're managing multiple websites, and one thing I was kind of feeling is that I was kind of feeling like we're wasting some of the resources, because within all of these websites there are pages where we don't need stuff that are from the other pages. So for instance, we have we're dealing with a news website, and we're actually implementing right now another set of features into this news website, like a job board, and also some charts, basically a page with a lot of charts about like market and such. And I was kind of feeling like having everything within the same Angular project and all of these graphing tools, libraries that are kind of heavy. Also inside the page where we only see the articles, we just like slow down the experience with the articles and kind of like kill our SEO, because we would maybe decrease the core web vitals, all of these metrics, right? So I was kind of thinking, how could we split maybe the website into multiple apps, but not make multiple projects, kind of like make it on the fly easily, maybe just select some folders and say, okay, you go here and you go here and you go here, and all is magic and, and all is good.
I see. So primarily in terms of like delaying some functionality that is not immediately necessary, or in what sense were you planning to apply a more modular approach?
Yeah, I think something more modular, yeah. Like being able to select what precisely I want to load on some section of my website.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. Like the graphing library is kind of heavy, so I don't want to have it everywhere, for instance.
Yeah, that's a good, you can look into, so with standalone components, we're going to ship more ergonomic, that's actually a proposal that I need to write today, a more ergonomic component level code splitting. So with the more ergonomic component level code splitting, you'll be able to delay certain features that are not necessary or that don't need to be interactive at the very beginning when the user opens the page. You may not need micro frontends in this particular case, even though there are like shared techniques there. Micro frontends you may want to lazy load as well, because they're usually a couple of hundreds of kilobytes. And they're usually larger functionality. Let's say in a event booking system, let's say you want to sell tickets, the admin panel is going to be, the admin panel is going to be a separate micro frontend from the user facing part for booking tickets and making reservations.
I see.
And yeah, and often multiple teams are developing them in parallel. Let's say there is a team in Eastern Europe, in Bulgaria, let's say, just a random country, which is developing the admin system. And there is another team in the Bay Area that is developing the user-facing part. They often don't need to even talk to each other too frequently. There is another team that is developing the shell, or kind of the common parts across the application, that provides the APIs for them to just render their parts of the application somewhere on the page. Yesterday, I talked to Tom Okino, who was running the React team, and he was part of the rewrite of the new Facebook UI. And it was very interesting how they were using something like micro frontends there as well, but very different compared to what the external perception is for micro frontends. Everyone has their own solution.
So I remember, well, when I first reached out to you and asked you to come and have this discussion here, because you were talking on the to the GDEs about gathering requirements, because so at that point we knew that the micro frontends were on the roadmap, but you're still gathering requirements. So I know, because a lot of the question that I get when I'm teaching is, what does the code look like? So are you at that point? Are you still gathering requirements? Like, do you have like, is there gonna be changes to the code?
Yeah, there might not be code actually at all. We'll see. Currently, it looks like we need to share some guidelines on how people need to be developing applications at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And it still depends on our conversation today. If you point us out to a certain area that we haven't explored yet. So we haven't,
because it seems like it's just a way of thinking. It's not really like we're going to be refactoring things. It's just like how we're thinking about things, right?
Yeah, there is some tooling that supports deployments at scale better than like others. For example, Bazel or NX with its cloud caching would support deployments and building applications at scale better. When you build a massive application, you can still deploy it as a single unit, but you also have cloud caching so that your build doesn't take hours. Some people I talked to, their build was taking a whole day.
Yeah, I worked with somebody who did that. Ergonomic component level code splitting sounds like a superpower. Sounds very cool.
Yeah, Sonny, there are a couple of blog posts by John Papa, I think, about component level code splitting. This is something you can have a look at, and also make sure you're following the roadmap and the standalone components proposal about component level code splitting APIs.
Okay,
That's
thanks.
a good question. Rob, how are you, Rob?
Hey everyone, hi Minko.
Hello.
Hi. I'm currently using a single spot. I don't know if you've heard of that application.
Yeah.
It's mostly for React, right? But we repurposed it for Angular. So it's kind of like sometimes it gets a little bit difficult to manage all these apps because you got to add a lot of URLs and different configurations for each, and also all the assets. We have to add them in a specific folder inside the shell, which is the single apps application, in order for us to manage that. Is there an easier way that we can, implement micro frontends just with Angular? Maybe creating an Angular application that manages all the other Angular applications?
Yeah. So you said the challenges are, it gets complicated because you have to manage many different URLs, and there are challenges with managing assets too, right?
Correct.
Okay. There are ways. I have talked to some big banks, for example. They're using just Angular CLI workspace in order to build microfrontends. And it mostly works. Pretty much their applications they're building their applications as like separate libraries, and they're assembling them into another application that is their shell, and they can lazy load them eventually. So for each application they have a wrapper, which is a component that the router in the shell application renders, and this component renders the microfrontend on its own. So this way, for each app, for each microfrontend, you need one library and one application. One library so that you can, which is the actual microfrontend, and one application which is the one application that you're developing this microfrontend in. And separately, you have the shell also, which consumes the library. This approach is actually it's a little bit verbose and a little bit has a few boilerplates, but has the fewest trade-offs. It's mostly around build speed, because you have to deploy the whole application at once. You can't deploy one application independently from the others. But this also solves a lot of challenges around managing dependencies. You can't be running multiple versions of Angular on the page. Another benefit is that static typing can come into play. So you could allow TypeScript to do some type checking on how you're using the microfrontend. Not everything is happening dynamically at runtime once you deploy it. So this approach kind of works fine. If you, with the Webpack version 5 disk caching that we are introducing, this would be even more viable option in the future. And you can always use something like NX, let's say, and enable remote caching so that you can make your deployments even faster. Or Bazel, in case your organization decided to go on Bazel. I think that's kind of the approach that we're mostly leaning forward right now, leaning towards. There is also another alternative is Mojo Federation. This is a very popular approach. There are quite a few risks there. Ideally, Mojo Federation promises that you could be running potentially applications that you built with different versions of Angular on the page. And here is the tricky part. With Angular, when we built an application with specific version of the Angular compiler, we're generating some IV instructions. And these IV instructions, we're assuming that they're going to be working with the same version of the Angular's runtime as the version that we use to build the application with. So if, let's say, you have built your application with version 12.0.1, and you're running your application with version 12.0.2, we don't have a guarantee that this is going to work, because we may change the IV instruction set in the meantime. So unless you have specified that you want to use a specific version of Angular for both building it and for deploying your applications, Mojo Federation might not be the best case. But if you agree on a specific version, then Mojo Federation is fine. Another approach is with web components to distribute. So you still build your microfrontends as separate libraries, and you can distribute them as web components that you can later render onto the page in your shell. That's another viable option, which works fine.
But with web components, can you still have that problem of this? Because this is, I think we were talking about this a couple months ago, that with the Mojo Federation, that you can accidentally put several different versions in there, and you really don't want to do that. Is there a solution for that with the scalable microfrontends, like to stop them from? Well, are you still going to use the shared node modules?
Yeah, that's a good question. Usually, what you do there is package each one independently, and each one has a separate version of Angular, which is pretty heavy. Yeah, that's what people often do. Or they share a global UMD bundle, and yeah, you can definitely hit this issue.
And we're counting on them to know that and not do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can. Yeah. Can you package the whole app as a web component? You can do that too, right? I mean.
Yeah, you can do it.
You can do all kinds of crazy stuff, Rob.
Yeah.
I'm a learning.
Yeah, another approach is iframes. And iframes often sound scary, but the
Yeah,
entire Google Cloud UI is an iframe. I would encourage you to go to cloud.google.com
we
and
tried that.
see what is going on
Actually,
there.
we tried
Yeah.
that, but my boss was not happy with that because we couldn't control the the data back and forth. So that was the issue with that.
It's like everything is
Google-
old is new again. Like bell bottoms come back in
Mhm.
style, and iframes are cool again. It's retro, y'all.
Although
Yeah.
Google Cloud is a slightly different way to implement an iframe, different iframe architecture. They have a hidden iframe on the page, which is running the Angular application. But we are not rendering the Angular application there. We are rendering the application in the mainframe. So what they have done is to monkey patch all the different DOM APIs within the iframe, and rather than rendering stuff and doing DOM manipulations, they're sending instructions to the mainframe, and the mainframe is doing this work.
Wild.
Yeah.
And that's recommended?
Yeah. No, we don't have recommendations yet. I'll say that this might not be recommended yet. They may eventually open source it, and there is going to be a content on it for sure. Like nothing is sure, but I have decent confidence that this is going to happen. And yeah, it's an interesting approach for sure. Definitely solves a lot of issues. Each challenge there is that every Angular application, every microfrontend is a separate app, completely separate application, which is running its own version of Angular. And each separate microfrontend comes in with its own Angular. So you're paying certain bandwidth cost. Like you're consuming more bandwidth because you need to download Angular for every single microfrontend that you open. But at the same time, you don't have any challenges around competing life cycles of the frameworks or competing life cycles of like the different instances of the router, and it's very well isolated.
Very
So
cool.
I'll say these are the main approaches that I have seen so far.
Ready for the next question? Mitri.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to establish a little bit of boundaries around my question. So for the purpose of the question, it may be helpful, and for the rest of the conversation as well, to suggest concentrating on the use case of having Angular as a microfrontend, shell, and leaves, no Vue, React, and whatever else. And what challenges do you see with the approach of Mojo Federation? I think you already kind of touched on it a little bit. The other day, Igor mentioned a couple issues, is that dependencies getting out of sync during the development, and this issue can be potentially solved via the monorepo or the library approach, just like you mentioned in your previous answer. And also depending on dependencies getting out of sync during the deployments. And that's when each team, for example, is responsible for a micro front-end leaf, and they run their deployments independently. So that's kind of my main actually concern. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions of getting around this issue with specifically Mojo Federation approach.
Yeah, Mojo Federation can bring so many issues because everything is happening very dynamically, and at runtime, the whole linking is happening at runtime. So what Igor probably has mentioned was around having different versions of the shell application, and like having. So with Mojo Federation, let's say the shell application could be running one version, and once you deploy Microfrontends, it could be eventually requiring a different version. You could have built it with a different version, and there might be incompatibilities there. So that is around the assumption that our IV instruction set is not stable yet, so we can make changes in it in any time. And this is part of the code that we're generating, which is already coupling your application to a particular version. And this is not a challenge for libraries, for instance, because there we're compiling the libraries every time when you build your application. Before that, they're in a partially compiled mode, let's say. So I guess that's I think I already touched on the challenges. The two main challenges I see is around are around the first one, which is having incompatible dependencies, which is very easy to happen, and it's even in the promise of Mojo Federation that this is supposed to happen, it is supposed to work. Let's say for a second we ignore the fact that the instruction set we haven't made it public, and let's say we made it public. Let's say you're using another, let's say a charting library. Then we're relying on the fact that the developers distributing this charting library, they're following semantic versioning precisely all the time, because that's what Mojo Federation relies on. That if there is a patch version, let's say you're using 0.0.1 in the shell, and you update to 0.0.2 in your Microfrontend, then you're assuming that the chart library person, they did not make any breaking changes at all because they just released a patch version. And that's a good assumption to have. That's what they said, but is that actually true? Some people can't really evaluate the breaking changes, not because they're bad engineers, but because it's just really hard to predict sometimes the breaking changes that are happening. We can predict them in Google only because we have hundreds of thousands of tests in Google to test the framework with. Otherwise, I'm sure we could have really so many breaking changes in patch releases that that's a big challenge. And the second is when you start linking everything dynamically, it's you just upload a bundle which is supposed to work with the rest of the application, with kind of like a snapshot of the application that you have seen in the past. And there are some uncertainties, primarily around I guess not too many uncertainties. It's mostly about third-party dependencies, but I guess what people are using there a little bit is a little bit of type checking around on the level of on the level of code splitting that you're performing. You're using the Microfrontend, which might not be a big deal. For example, the dynamic import of a particular like Microfrontend, you might not be able to get the exact type of the module, let's say, or if you're lazy loading a component, theoretically, you might have to cast this to a particular symbol that is from the Microfrontend, which could not be entirely a bad, like, tragic, let's say. I don't know if this answers your question.
Yeah, so basically the answer kind of is that Mojo Federation, there is really no guarantees about having the right dependencies during the deployments that are out of sync for the Microfrontends. And if we want to have that guarantee, we have to go with a different approach, something like a library approach.
Yeah, I'll say so. Yeah, the guarantees are coming from the library author, who is supposed to have followed semantic versioning extremely precisely, but also semantic versioning is defined. So we're following semantic versioning on Angular for sure. We're like very strict on it, and still, this corner case when you build Angular your application with a particular version of the compiler, but you have slightly different runtime, this is not captured by semantic versioning, but breaks Mojo Federation.
Perfect. Thank you. And also, going with the library approach, it means that the whole application needs to be deployed at once. That's just a requirement.
Yeah, I have been talking to people, how are they doing their deployments? So it looks like Facebook, for example, they're deploying the whole application at once, and this is happening pretty much like every other minute or so. With Google Cloud, they have the flexibility to deploy parts of the application separately because of the iframe approach, because literally every application is a separate, every microphone is a separate application. but they're paying the cost with the extra size of their microfrontends. They need to ship separate version of Angular every time. So yeah, trade-offs of different approaches. And Google Cloud, they're operating on a huge scale. Their application is close to 10 million lines of code right now. And probably most teams can just like wait for like 30, 40, 50 minutes for their builds to complete. If they're using caching, it could be way, way less of a wait.
Excellent questions as always, Dmitry.
Can't wait to see some documentation about more specifics of this approach, the library approach. Would be very interesting to read. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Minko, how are you doing on time? Do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour?
Let me quickly. Yes. Yeah. I have meetings.
Okay. So we have 3 more questions left, and we'll see how we're doing. So you guys just keep an eye on the time, because we have to let Minko go at the top of the hour. So I want to see if we can get through the rest of these questions. So just try to keep your questions brief if you can. Deb Malia, how are you?
Hi everyone. I actually wanted to pick on a point that Dmitry said, and we have the same problem in our company. Like, we have this huge app which does a whole lot of things, and we have discussed that we might want to break it into like standalone apps, but then just to make sure that the deployments are not related, we don't have to deploy everything. So like, if one part of the app needs upgradation or some changes, everything will go. And we have several white labels as well. So I think at the moment, because we are not very familiar with microfrontends, we are kind of going ahead with the small standalone applications. But I was really thinking that, do you think this is a good case where we can probably go with microfrontends? And I think with the packages that Manfred has, there's a way to strictly mention that it cannot be out of sync, the Angular versions. So if we did that, is this a good case for microfrontends?
So if you can have separate applications and that's not a big issue for your business, then I would recommend just going with separate applications. You're going to have way less headache. And if you can have them in the same Angular CLI workspace, that's even better. That's like the ideal scenario, so that you can make sure that you update everything once we release a new version of Angular. If the not smooth transitions from one micro application to another is going to be a challenge and your users are going to be unhappy, then you can do something. Maybe you can explore Mojo Federation. Manfred's packages are very useful. If you want to use Mojo Federation, make sure you just don't take advantage of the deployments of applications one by one. Rather than that, deploy everything at once, so that you can make sure that you have consistent version of Angular that is used across all the applications.
By the way, if anyone wanted to do a little hello world simple tech talk, even if you've never done a tech talk before, if anybody wanted to put together a simple example of CLI workspace and do a tech talk for us, I would absolutely be happy to help you, because I have a working repo that I can help you with the code and everything. I would love to see somebody do a very first tech talk who's never done a tech talk before and show us how to put together a CLI workspace. It's very, very easy and it's cool. And if you get stuck, I will help you. I'm just saying.
I wouldn't mind.
Huh?
I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind doing it.
All right. Have your people call my people, Rob.
I will do that.
All right. All right. I want to say this because it looks really, I don't know why I like your name. Vato, hold on. Margvelashvili?
Margvelashvili.
Oh, it
yes.
sounds cooler when
Pretty
you say it.
close.
I was close, though. I was close. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question. So we use iframes similar to what you said about Google. We do have one iframe and the main app that switches between the other applications. We also use NGRX stores, and we use same NGRX store. We have it has a shared library, and use it in the main app and the child app. And what we do for communication is just send actions between each other, so that this state between main app and the child apps are synchronized. So my question was if the Mojo Federation helps out with having one instance of the app rather than having them in both main app and the child app and just send the actions, if that's possible.
I'll say this approach, if your approach works for you right now, just keep using it, because otherwise you get into a shared dependencies challenge, and it's gonna get harder over time and more and less predictable.
So we also have it as a monorepo, like all of the apps are in monorepo. Wouldn't that also avoid the versioning issue?
Oh, and you deploy them at the same time, or?
We use NX, so we try to split them up on the Bamboo, the deployment time.
I see. I see. I would suggest deploying them at the same time. So if you have a shared version, but still you deploy one application on one version and another on like a different version, then you can still hit the challenge with different applications at runtime depending on different versions. So ideally, if you can keep your approach and you're happy with it, you don't have to change it. And if you're happy with the like same origin cookies also, which you should be happy actually with it. Looks like you're serving all the applications from the same origin. So you can definitely use Mojo Federation. I think this may bring extra complications over time. Especially it opens the door for this shared dependency functionality, and this shared dependency functionality is a little bit sketchy.
We had a conversation a while back with, I think Sonder, Alex Rickabaugh was here, and because somebody was asking about, somebody said, can anybody, we're looking for somebody who's actually using Mojo Federation in production, and we had a whole conversation about it. And basically the general consensus was beware, or just be careful with it. It might not be a good road to go down. I'm very excited because just now we had a collaboration there in the chat. Akshay and Rob are going to do this, and Val's going to host, and we're going to have a talk about CLI workspace. It's very exciting, you guys. I'm super stoked about that. Okay, we are running out of time. So Rainer.
Yes,
Rainer,
hello. Thank you.
Hanekamp,
hey. Yes, that's right.
Hey, all right, yeah. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. I just have a very quick question about confirmation about the Module Federation thing. So if I understand you correctly, you say that it might even be a problem if we're using two different Angular versions that just have a different version on the patch level. So it's not about the minor or the major level. It can already happen on the patch level. Is that right?
Yeah, even on the patch. We can make just, we can fix a bug in one IV instruction. And when you deploy a new version of the Microfrontends that is built with this patch version, but the shell application is running the previous patch version, unpredictable things can happen. I have had this.
Do we get any particular error message so that we know that's it, or can everything happen?
Yeah, anything can happen. You can get an error message. You may not. For example, I did not get an error message. I was just some things worked a little bit differently, and but in general the application worked, but some things were just breaking a little. So I spent 4 hours. That was for Google I/O, for DevTools. When we embedded DevTools in the Google I/O experience, I built DevTools with one version of Angular, and after that I added another UMD bundle on the I/O page, and it took me like 3-4 hours to find the specific instruction which breaks. And I figured it out after that.
Okay. Well, thanks. Good to know.
This was very cool, Minko. I really hope that you come back and visit us again very soon and often. Okay, so we're running out of time. What is the next step? Like, where are we at now in the process? Because I know it was on the roadmap, and so it's on. Do you think that we're going to be seeing anything official coming out from the Angular team anytime soon? Because I know you've been gathering feedback so that you could kind of write the requirements. Is that where are you at now? Do you feel like you have enough feedback?
I do, yeah. I do have enough feedback. Just would have probably in November there are going to be a couple of articles. First, we're going to start with more general guidance on how you can organize your dependencies. We're going to strongly recommend a monorepo because we see how people start with multiple repositories and over time they have different versions. And when they introduce a component library, then all the challenges like happen. So we're also going to probably write a few articles about different, maybe Alex Rickabaugh, actually. I'm trying to convince him to write this article. We'll see.
Alex Rickabaugh? I love that guy. Yeah, we haven't seen him in a few months. I think he's probably the next person. Speaking of which, okay, I have a meeting with you in a couple of weeks. I'm going to ask you, can I just ask you now? Can we have Alex Rickabaugh next month for the hallway track?
Sure, you can reach out.
Yes, yeah. I love him. Okay, yeah, I'm going to try and get him next month because he's great. Okay, any final thoughts for us? Any other things, anything you're looking forward to, or any advice for us, anything you think we should know?
I would just want to ask you if you have implemented Mojo Federation, not Mojo Federation, but Microfrontends architecture in any way that we haven't discussed today. I would really, really, really love if you can get in touch with me so that we can chat about this. You can send me a direct message on Twitter if you're on Twitter, or you can send me a message on LinkedIn if that's what you prefer.
Or Angular Nation.
You can reach out.
You're on Angular Nation, right?
Reach out to Bonnie also if we're unable to connect. Yeah, we would really just like to explore all different alternatives so that we can make the most informed decision possible.
Absolutely. This was amazing. It's always great to have you. Thank you so much, Minko. I really appreciate you coming. And I think I speak for everybody. Well, actually, okay, so I don't have to speak for everybody because this is my favorite part of every call when I ask everybody to come off of mute and help me thank Minko.
Thank you. Thank you, Minko.
Thank you, Minko.
Thank you, Minko.
Thank you. Thank you, Minko.
All right, that's a wrap. Everybody.
Minko, you got to do Zoolander. You got to do the Zoolander pose.
Do the Zoolander pose, Minko. What is that?
When
Rob, you got to show us the Zoolander pose.
He has to be like he's throwing a kiss or something. Like, Zoolander, the movies.
If you do
it. I remember that. Yeah.
Yes.
You got to do it first, Rob. You can't say that when your camera's off, Rob.
I just put a brand new sticker on my camera.
Have a good
Bye, Minko. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao, gracias.
Bye-bye.